Good evening, primetime partiers. It's primetime party time. Welcome back to our hour of all things media and entertainment. Live on the air at 9 p.m. at PTPTshow.com and on your time, wherever you stream podcasts. Tonight we are going to lull you to bedtime the way our favorite midnight show does best. We are channeling the essence and the format. Netflix's Midnight Diner, Tokyo Stories. That's all we have on our menu. But we'll chat about any aspect of the show, as long as the chat room brings the ingredients. That's our policy. Do we have an audience? More than you'd expect. After sharing some of our most memorable plot lines and the concept of a bedtime story show, we will share our recipe of the night. Oyasumi nasai! Hey everyone, how you doing? This is a special episode of Primetime Party Time, where we take on Midnight Diner, Tokyo Stories. So, yeah, it's still Tracy and Daniel being here, even though you might find our introduction to be more along the lines of the show that we are getting into tonight.
Yeah, Midnight Diner, Tokyo Stories. You know, have you ever thought that our show is technically a midnight show on the East Coast? So
There
it kind
we
of works
go.
out. But yeah, no, instead we're talking about a show that airs whenever you'd like it to air. We recommend bedtime. The show definitely recommends for bedtime. It airs on Netflix, and what's it about?
So, Midnight Diner, Tokyo Stories. As told by a combination of IMDb and Wikipedia and us. It's an anthology of human relationship stories connected by the only open in the wee hours diner the characters frequent. Resolutions are often facilitated by the owner and chef. That's like a snapshot of it. But I will say Rotten Tomatoes gives a little bit more background to this. And they say, in a back alley of a busy district sits a small eatery called Meshiya, referred to by its patrons as the Midnight Diner. This little joint, which the master runs by himself, is open only from midnight to 7 a.m. The menu consists of only a pork miso soup set, beer, sake, and shochu. But the master's policy is to make whatever his customers request, as long as he has the ingredients. So, yeah, the master and his food and the patrons set the stage for humorous and sometimes wistful episodes of human drama that feed both the belly and the soul. So yeah, this series is directed by Joji Matsuoka. And the main star, while there is a large cast that come in and out, and there are some people who are always present at the bar, but the main star is the master, who's played by Kaoru Kobayashi. And it airs currently, and it started in 2014. We're specifically talking about the seasons 2016 and 2019. So, yeah, there are a total of 5 seasons, but within the Tokyo Stories edition, there are 2 seasons with 20 episodes. And you can watch it all on Netflix. Now, this show didn't just come out of thin air or from a, pitch to Netflix. This is from a manga called Shinya Shokudo, or Midnight Diner. It is a series written and illustrated by Yaro Abe. It is about a late night diner open from midnight to dawn, and its eccentric patrons. Sounds familiar because it is the show. The manga has been serialized in Shokugakun's Big Comic Original since 2006, with its chapters compiled into 22 wideband volumes as of September 2020. So it's good to note this because a lot of other shows, particularly anime, is based off of manga. So when the manga starts to run out, you know that your show is going to end fairly soon or within a certain number of seasons. Since this one is still ongoing, you can have some faith that the episodes will probably be ongoing as well. But yeah, I would say another kind of interesting perspective this show has, which there are many that we'll get into, but if you look into a lot of different content that we'll consume from Japan, you'll get a lot more on businessmen and students. And this is definitely a little bit more of it's heartwarming. A lot of it is because you're seeing a spotlight more on counterculture or kind of people still trying to figure it out, but less in this like glamorized way and more in the I'm still stuck working, my kind of night shift job and when am I going to finally make it. So it's a lot of kind of like showing the human struggle, but also the little joys in between and how people kind of either make their big break or don't and make peace with it, which I think that's why they show is good about taking a hustle and bustle. And Tokyo is a very fast paced city. But if you think about the speed of the theme song, which we replicated earlier on here, it's very slow and it's about really slowing down and getting into these granular moments and just vignettes on like two people amongst the large crowds.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. It's interesting. No, it's interesting, especially because it's like this is the. I'm fairly new to the series myself, and it is interesting. I don't think that there is a single scene that I watched over a handful of episodes that we'll get into tonight that only featured one character. Everything was an interpersonal conversation of some sort,
Yeah.
which is kind of a beautiful thing. And also, like you said, which is not only important to the series, but something the series leans in on is it follows that like movie rule, where it's like you write something and it's supposed to be about like the most important time in that character's life. And to your point, like all of these characters are figuring out they most of the time seem to be in some major transitional stage.
Yes. I think that's why like a lot of the shows that we'll talk about and a lot of the kind of golden age of TV is about these serialized seasons of television. And this one is the absolute opposite, where each show is almost like a mini movie, where there's like a beginning, a middle, and end. There's a climax. There's like, the resolution. Everything gets wrapped up. There's not a lot of loose ends, except for things where it's like, this is kind of more of a reality of life, and this problem is not necessarily one you're going to solve. So it's not like they kind of overdo the happy ending. It's kind of more like some things you can come to peace with, and some you might have to accept. But at the end, there is a resolution in some shape or form. Though I will say, there is more of an emphasis on the happy endings
There are a
in
lot of
this
happy
show. And
endings.
I think that's why it does seem to be a nice cue on before bedtime show.
Yeah, I'd agree. It'd be very jarring if we were left some things to contemplate by this show, perhaps as viewers.
Yeah.
It knows very well that it's a, and I mean we enjoy. Obviously, the appointment viewing aspect of it's cool too. Just like the whole bedtime story finality to it in a way. Though you do see sort of recurring characters, and
Yes.
they're even there. Sort of a term that you used when we were talking about the show this week was peanut gallery for the actual stories going on. And so they won't always like get any real like character or moments or if the story's not about them they'll still appear, and so it's really rewarding in a way where the story of in that diner becomes about that regular in particular, and you're like, oh, I've been seeing this person, I know this person, now we get to know them.
Yeah.
It's so cool. This is it. It's great because instead of having to go out and find this yourself out in the world, you can kick back and you can be a regular at this diner, and you can watch as the other patrons kind of come in and out night over night and kind of get to know everybody in this little part of town and feel like you're a part of this community.
Yeah, and this show takes place in Shinjuku in this kind of alley that's known for having little bars and yakitori stands and things that are open later at night. And a big line this guy says in the intro every time is a lot of people are hurrying home. That's when my day starts. And I actually have a lot of people who are kind of like not trying to hurry home and want to kind of stave that off for a little bit at his diner. But he does curate his own community. And in each episode, like as much as they don't necessarily follow chronologically the seasons, they always have the New Year's at the end where they eat like their New Year's noodles. And like even one year they have it where he like brings like crab legs for everyone, is like, I'm treating all of you to this. Like it definitely becomes like the people who are kind of the quote unquote peanut gallery and butting into everyone's business really are kind of like his little mini family unit that he treats every once in a while. So it's really nice to see. And let's see what other people had to think about
Ooh,
this show.
okay.
So there's not a ton of reviews out here, but
Hmm.
we did look on Rotten Tomato, and I thought it was worth mentioning that this show has 100% rating on the tomato meter, which I don't think happens quite often.
I don't know if I've
At
seen
all.
that.
I don't know if I've seen that. I can't think of the last time I saw 100%, so I know it doesn't happen super
Doesn't
often.
happen often.
And yeah, like I know some people really live by Rotten Tomatoes the way I live by Yelp reviews for trying out new restaurants. So if this is definitely a recommend, and the audience score is 95%, and we'll like track down that 5% like a dog.
Yeah, I want to
But
know what they're about.
yeah, it's like what didn't do it enough for you, but maybe nothing does. So the critic reviews for Midnight Diner Tokyo Stories are as follows. I'm picking a handful, but ones that were remarkably well written. So this is from Layla Hamedi from Pop Matters. And she says, finding the joy in personal happiness through the duty and expectation is what makes Midnight Diner Tokyo Stories both a cultural phenomenon and as easily palatable as those New Year's soba noodles, also known as toshikoshi. And I would say this one
It's a good start.
from the Guardian. Stuart Heritage says Midnight Diner Tokyo Stories is just as woozy and narcoleptic as you would imagine. Donald Lynch from The Independent, a UK publication, says, like Japanese food itself, it's easy to digest but contains substantive depth. From The Hollywood Reporter, Clarence Sui says, while not exactly hot cinematic cuisine, Matsuoka's film offers a plain and fulfilling supper. And going along that, we have Pratim De Gupta from Film Companion that says, Midnight Diner is almost meditative in its languid narrative, and it might not be something you'd like to binge all night, but to savor one bite at a time.
That's a massive compliment to it from like as far as I can see. I mean, that's the thing that I love about this series the most is that it does feel like you're living out these stories with this community, and so it doesn't really make sense to. I mean, it does, of course, but one of the great things about this show is that you can always go back to an episode. And what I'm excited to do as more of a new viewer is I'm excited to go back to an episode a while down the line and just kind of like pick out a favorite like story to relive, because you get a lot of these people's lives, and it's interesting in the ways where like these stories, they don't happen over a night, they happen over like 6-month periods often. And it's so, I don't know, I really feel like if you were to revisit any of these, it's a lot like looking back on like memories, in a sense. And so, yeah, I would agree. They're great to kind of just like throw one on as you're kind of like getting in the mood to go to bed or something like that.
And I think there's always a new piece you'll pick up from these, because I watched one once and then watched them again and been like, I didn't really think about, since like you said, it's as much, although say like to use like camera terms, they'll have the main people in focus, but it's like the people in the background are not completely out of focus, and they're kind of always bringing their way into the foreground. But because of that, you can sometimes kind of, your eye will go to someone else and kind of zoom in on them yourself. So when you
Hmm.
rewatch them, you kind of pick up different characters' little nuances that you might not have, because you were so sucked into like, I have to figure out what happens at the end of this story. But then when you watch it again, you'll start to see this is how like these other people are interacting with the story. And then you'll kind of look at it from farther away and see like, how has this, regular patron acted in all of these different stories, and what does that say about
Yeah.
them as a like character, and when they eventually get their spotlight, it kind of all stitches together a little bit more. So
Absolutely.
that's definitely a large compliment to the chef of this show. So yeah, no, it's, we're definitely biased here in really enjoying this this one. It's
Definitely. It's fun
very
when
sentimental.
yes. And it's fun when a format surprises you. And like
Yes.
the format of this show surprised me. Like it just kind of like threw regular rules kind of out and was like we have a specific
Yeah.
vision of like something we want to be that happens to fit in with this medium the best, I guess, or adapted to this medium the best, and they kind of take whatever liberties they want in a way that just like they're so confident in what they are,
It
and it's a delight.
yeah, it really inspires me because I feel like I am a person who pitches stuff that people will always say like, "Ah, that won't work." But I see this and be like, "This is how you have that pitch where you're like, I'm gonna do a show that's about like small vignettes and cooking and Tokyo." And people be like, no one's gonna watch that. And they're just like, no, they're going to
They're
watch
gonna
it
watch
and
it.
you'll see.
Yeah, we're gonna drop the camera sometimes, and yeah, it's wild. Um, yeah,
Yeah. It really like shouldn't work, and yet it works so well. That's the fun part about this show. It definitely, if you're a writer or creator, I think it can be very nice watching this show and being like, you can really bring a kind of diversified vision to life. You can take all of your favorite things and put it in the pan and it'll taste good. Is a lot of what this show is. And yeah, it's kind of, yeah, it does remind me of like, if you were making a TV show and you were also like doing a really low stakes episode of Chopped, because you're like, you have all of these ingredients on hand, and how do I make this into a show?
hmm
And that's very much what he's kind of doing in the back, but it's also like on his terms. So he's like, I'll make you whatever you want as long as I have the ingredients. So that's why you'll see like these patrons that like come in and be like, I brought pancake mix. I want this. Or he'll kind of say like, this would be better with real noodles and I only have instant. And they're like, that's fine. So
Yeah, that is
yeah.
interesting. The comments of I've never personally been comfortable enough with someone serving me to or serving food, cooking food for me to be like, no, actually the person that this dish is sentimental for me about, like they made it this way, and so I am going to make a comment on your cooking. Like it's
I
it's an
know.
interesting environment. It's fun. With that
It's
said,
fun. Yeah. Oh
uh,
no.
I was gonna say, with that said, I we've kind of like spoken to the format of the show and
Yeah.
hopefully sold it. But I guess now the question is like, what are these stories and like who are these characters coming in?
Yeah.
And so I guess like if you haven't seen it, this would be a good time to like go kind of find a few. But otherwise, like let's just kind of run through some of the favorites or some of the ones that we watched
Yeah.
here.
We have selected what I would say are like the episodes that'll get you hooked. And a lot of them are in the, I'd say, 2016 to 2019 period. So the first episode, and this is the first one I watched, and it's kind of when I was like, I'm not going to stop watching this show. I'm just going to keep watching each one, is 101. And the episode is about tanmen, which this is the pork and vegetable kind of noodle soup. that has similar to like a broth, but a lot more vegetables thrown in. And what's kind of interesting is that it is also a late night show within a late night show because the focal point of this episode is a radio announcer that has a late night slot. And so he goes to this midnight diner to kind of get his little midnight snack before he goes on the air, or sometimes afterwards when he's finished. And so he goes to this diner and he runs into a taxi driver that he recognizes from one of his favorite childhood television shows. And it very much seems to be like a Power Rangers esque type show. And it goes into a kind of fully heartwarming story of this, girl being on this really famous, really kind of cult followed show, but then having a bit of a falling out from it, like not loving being in the spotlight, also being in love with a co actor who ends up coming out as trans. And then they kind of are, she was like really accepting of him at the time, but he kind of needed some space to do his own thing. And then they come out together as when, you know, they both kind of reach their own different identities. Like she's really happy being a taxi driver, and then she's really happy doing her own thing and likes to talk about her experience. And then she ends up going on the air and kind of saying like, hey, this was me, I was from this show. And she like does that whole like really large chant that they do for their like superhero
yeah, the radio
bit.
movie. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, and all the fans are going crazy, and it's kind of this really nice story because it's like, that person had to go through their own journey of self-discovery and finding that all of their fans are really accepting of them and embracing them. And they both reconnect as not actors anymore, and then they're like, oh yeah, like it's really nice to see you after all these years. And then the radio host kind of plays the guy who, like, well, at first he kind of pushed both of them a little bit far, and they were a little bit like, hey, we don't necessarily want to like relive all this time because we were on like a really kind of high pressured job and it was a tough time for both of us. But then they both figured out what they wanted to do. And I think what's kind of nice about this episode as well is the girl who's the taxi driver gets to actually show that she's like, I'm really dedicated to my job here, and it like makes me happy doing this job. And being an actor wasn't all it was cracked out to be for me, and I'm happy with where I'm at right now. I don't feel like this, oh, you can't talk about my fame days because I'm trying to be that again. It's more for her being like, I'm happier this way, so I don't like dwelling on the past, which I think is an interesting perspective because I don't think a lot of people, and I can't think of a lot of pieces of content that go into people wanting to leave fame. There's a lot of people chasing fame, but then there's a lot of people leaving. But this is a cool episode too because you do see the woman who is the other co-actress in other episodes, and you're getting to see like, oh, this is where you started out and your backstory. So I think that's like when you go back to watch previous seasons, you'll see, because you'll kind of see her hang out with this other woman and be like, and they just kind of come in to be the peanut gallery like on a lot of other episodes. And you don't really question why people show up, since like it's a lot of like, you see a lot of the same people, but then you see other people who pop in and out. And then, yeah, this is like a good example of what we were saying, where, you get other people who comment on other stories get their own story. So the Tonman one is very nice for that. It talks about a lot of parts of the human experience, a lot of people figuring out their identities, getting accepted in their communities. It's very heartwarming. And they also do a bit of a slapstick bit on this dish because the taxi driver gets attention from the other patrons by not ordering her soup with noodles. And it's supposed to be that she's being healthier by not eating carbs late at night. And the other, patrons jab the other customers as they eat the noodles, going. And so that part is fun. Yeah. How did you like this episode?
I thought that this was a really strong kind of like this was the first episode I ever watched.
Yeah.
And so it did a really good job at like being that encompassing. Like these are all of the things that the show is. It's funny. It's got a bit of visual flavor. It's got a a bit of actual flavor going on too. It's
Yes.
yeah, it's heartwarming. It's about like real issues and people that make mistakes
Yeah.
and are conflicted and whatnot. And I was actually it was funny because you were kind of like telling me what the show was beforehand, and I had a hard time kind of piecing it together, probably because we had just done an episode on this show about battle episodes. So I was very surprised to see that the show has quite a budget and goes off the location of the diner quite a bit. So there's a lot of scenes that take place in the radio booth, or there were flashbacks and whatnot. And so it was interesting, like as a way of like kind of sitting down and getting into the world of the show for the first time. What's up, Jude?
I know. Friend of the pod and Hound Chibby's in the background, also praising the Ton.
She like it?
She liked it and definitely agreed with everything Daniel had to
What'd
say.
she think about corn dog? A childish fight over a fish sausage corn dog leads to a schism between an Asakusa comedian and his now famous assistant.
Yeah. So this one is great. There's one short review. There weren't a ton of reviews I could find in major publications from the New Yorker that compares this comedian to like a Jerry Lewis style comedian. So it's interesting. And he's kind of supposed to be this insult comic that is famed in Asakusa, which is known for being kind of a tourist trap and very popular destination to go. There's a really popular temple around there that a lot of people visit because it's very well known and a Tokyo landmark. And so then thus there are a lot of entertainment venues kind of built around there, and there are a few of the major television studios too. So what's interesting though is this guy comes into the diner with his kind of assistant slash prodigy mentee who is starting to kind of make their own name for themselves. And they first fight over it because the master makes the mentee, named Hajime, I believe, a corn dog, though uses a fish hot dog instead of a regular hot dog. And he makes the other guy pancakes because the guy really wanted pancakes. But then the comedian just is like, well, I just want your corn dog because it looks so good. And they fight over stuff. But I think what this is interesting about is it's showing someone who's going a little bit past their prime and still trying to cling to the limelight. So this guy still wants to be the same kind of comic he was when that was popular, even though it's starting to fade. And you see him kind of go downhill a little bit quickly. There are episodes where they show him kind of being in a drunken stupor and being really depressed and really rejecting his assistant, who has now at the same time gotten his like immediate stardom. And I think a little bit bigger than this guy ever had it, because he's booking all these like television shows. He's becoming a heartthrob that's on the cover of magazines. And yeah, there's a part where the guy is really drunk and says all these horrible things about Hajime, the assistant. But then that guy ends up kind of paying him back because he knows, he talks to the master, who the master's kind of like, well, didn't he help you really get your start? Like maybe you should just pay him back this favor because it'll be, you get what you give back type situation. And he does. He gets him a job on a drama where he kind of adds the comedic relief to this drama. And it's pretty funny when you watch it. It looks kind of like he's in like these, really intense soap operas where he is doing all these comedy bits. And then he comes back to the bar and the master says, hey, you should buy the round of corn dogs for Hajime. And he's like, why would I do that? He's like, because he's the one booking you all these jobs. And then they kind of like tease each other, but then you see them walking away at the end of the night. And the guy like his assistant says, like, I'll never let you retire. And he's like, well, I'm going to take all of your jobs. And it's this nice moment of them coming full circle, of them both being able to be successful in their own ways and kind of having fun with it after having a lot of, real significant drama and, damage to their relationship in the middle. But at the end, they all bond over their love of corn dogs. And at the end, too, like all of these episodes, which if we haven't mentioned, we'll mention it now, along with there being a central focus on the characters with other ones popping in and out to give their takes, there is a dish that character is ordering, and that's the food that they say at the end of the episode and show you how to make it. Or in a lot of times sometimes they'll sing it, sometimes they'll just kind of like list out like this is the gist of how you make this dish. So for this one it was a corn dog, and at the end too they kind of deep fried some of the fish hot dog and we're like, hey, this is good by itself too. And the guy in the back is being like, well, can I have some? And they start to fight over the food again. And it's just funny because it's also to be like, all this stuff changed for the better, and at the same time this guy didn't change at all.
Yeah, yeah. But they're able to talk about it. This was actually one of my favorite endings, when they're kind of walking down the alley again after the diner, and they're kind of
Yes.
able to verbally spar about their careers together. I was gonna say this was like the first episode that kind of touched on something that I saw a lot of times in this show, but it's not. When we just talked about 101 Tan Men, this episode does a very similar thing where meeting your heroes is a
Oh
very
yeah.
tough, complicated thing.
Yeah.
In this way, it's sort of a different way, and it comes up again in another episode that we watch later. But it's an interesting sort of similarity that follows a lot of these stories. It's really strong here.
They definitely do touch on the like be careful when you meet your heroes, and kind of a tentative view on fame and how
Yeah,
fleeting it is and how quickly it comes and how quickly it goes. So,
right.
there's something to be said there about how the assistant's on the rise, but he could easily, later on become the guy who's making the dirty jokes at the bar where the women who are there every week are like, hey, cut that out. And they're like, oh no, it's fine. He's a comedian. They're like, meh, this
Fame is
guy's funnier.
right. Fame as you'd expect at 3 a.m. in a small diner.
Exactly. And then the next episode we want to talk about is one of my favorites. And
Hmm.
it's based on tonteki, which is like a grilled pork dish, but it's about an office worker and this woman who loves these pork steaks. And she also loves to knit sweaters for whatever guy she has a crush on, even if she's not like vetted them that much. So they show her throughout the year, like knitting a sweater. And then if she finds out that guy has a girlfriend or is into someone else, you see her like viciously rip it up. Like a note I had for this episode is like it's Weezer's The Sweater Song in a literal television episode,
It's
because it's
perfect.
like, do you want to undo my sweater? And it's like, yeah, like she undoes the sweater as soon as the relationship is over. And then as soon as one works out, she's just knitting every piece of clothing you could ever knit with the yarn. But I think what's great about this one, it feels very relatable, even though she's older in life. It's kind of like having that high school naivete of like, I have a crush on this person and they don't really know I exist. I'm gonna make them this gift and then they're gonna really notice me. And she makes this like really nice cable knit sweater and gives it to this guy who couldn't care less, is not very cool about it. He's gracious when he receives it, but then later he's like, "Ah, man, I'm really dating this other girl who will like get real wild jealous if
She
she found
destroys
out
the
I got a
sweater.
sweater for someone else." Which it's like, you can't just say it's from your mom or something. Like you're not very creative. You kind of want to tell her, don't you? Because you're a little bit. And so, yeah, that guy ends up working with this other person who actually has a crush on the sweater girl and gives him the sweater. So this guy wants an excuse to talk to the sweater woman, and he asks her to teach him how to knit. And so she does in the park, but she's also kind of fishing for, hey, can you tell him how the, how's the sweater fitting? Like, would he want another color and all this stuff? And eventually he shows up wearing the sweater, kind of badly fixed up because apparently, the other sweater got somewhat ripped up when the other girl was jealous or something. And so it's this moment of him coming in with his repaired sweater. The girl is obviously really, you know, heartbroken that the person she thought really liked all of her stuff really could care less. But then the master intervenes as he always does and says, like, this guy came in and like every night trying to figure out how to fix your sweater so that like you kind of would never know. And she ends up kind of weirdly getting drunk, passing out in the street, waking up to be to see this guy and like tell him like confessing her love for him, and he confesses his love for her. And then at the end they're just both wearing all of this knitwear, which is hilarious because it's just like her being like, my love language is crocheting and knitting, and so you have like a beanie and a scarf, and now I'm knitting you like boxers. And it's just like, you'll be like, okay, so this guy's just going to be like head to toe in yarn as long as this relationship keeps going. But this one was very tender. It's
Yeah, just the facts agrees. Tonteki is a great episode. Something that, yeah, I would say like with Tonteki, it is perfect at displaying the sort of like intimate perspective that you kind of don't get all the time through like every single one of the characters. And so when
yes.
someone's pining over someone and someone else is pining over someone else, and et cetera, and so nobody's really on the same wavelength with each other. You just get all of these shots of these people looking at each other, looking at the gifts with these sort of different facial expressions of either like having some great desire behind them or having some sort of ambivalence, or noting one thing that devastates one person as like a fun jovial kind of laugh to another character. And this episode just kind of zooms in on all of that like real truth that you see in these kind of situations. And yeah, and then it sort of like comes to a head when the master has to intervene. And it's an absolutely like beautiful depiction of that kind of situation, and like you said, tender, yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's cool because it shows in a very visual, physical way, like her amount of kind of emotional investment in people. And instead of making her look desperate or kind of pitiful, you're more just going like, wow, she cares so much. And you can just tell, like, as soon as she finds the right person, all of that dedication will be appreciated. But I think like a lot of times when you see the person who is always the one kind of pining and being a hopeless romantic, like, it's kind of like if Ted from How I Met Your Mother was always knitting, like this would be a very long Afghan blanket.
That would be great. That would be
It'd be
great.
many seasons long. So yeah, that's like, for her, you're more sympathetic to her plea of being the one trying to just find the right way to communicate her feelings, and you can tell she is shy about it. Like that is part of why she does the sweater, is she kind of is like, well, when I give someone a sweater, they have to know I'm like really into them. Even though like you see that, and even people at the bar kind of comment and go like, well, like, have you talked to them before? Like, do you know their situation? You can't be just knitting for like weeks and not know them that well, which is funny. um and yeah, like that's kind of like why you sympathize with her, because she just does put so much time into people before she even really knows if they're worth it. And that's the part where like, some people at the bar start to tell her like, yeah, it's a little bit foolish, but I think you are very quickly invested in her character and kind of like, I mean, someone's got to be the right sweater, right?
You'd hope. You'd hope.
Someone's got to
She
fit.
deserves it.
So, and eventually the right person does. The one that wanted to fix the sweater ends up being the one for her. And
Just
that's it really does, you know, stitch together well. And then the next one, I know. Pun,
wow.
pun, pun,
I'm
pun, pun.
doing like a little silent clap over here. Uh,
And the next one we have is Hot Pot for One. I think this is the one that I would say really puts the drama aspect of this show on full display. It's about a diner regular, an older woman who reunites with a classmate, and despite her own good upbringing, she now works a menial job to support a troublesome nephew. So you do see her cleaning out a lot of hotel rooms and stuff, and you see the nephew who's like a young, very like able-bodied person who could be working on their own, not doing anything really, just kind of like lazing around and getting drunk a lot. And so when she reconnects with this person at the diner, they kind of tell her, like, hey, you know, you really need to kind of give this nephew some tough love and be like, there's a certain amount of time you can more in your situation, but now you really need to support yourself because you're taking advantage of someone and not letting them get on their own. And at first she lashes out because she's kind of like, who are you to really comment on my life? And now this, my nephew seems kind of hurt. But even though the situation doesn't fully resolve itself, you do see her looking at her own life in a different way than she did at the beginning of the episode. How do you feel about this one?
this was not the happiest episode, and this is kind of
No.
like this is what I mean when I'm like complimenting the grounded nature of the show.
Yeah.
In the way where it's like about characters who feel like people that you'd meet at a midnight diner and who make mistakes but are lovable. That you get to see, and also a big reason this episode's really memorable for me is not the main character of this episode, but someone that she speaks to, uh, and who knows her, is someone who we know actually from this series up to this point. One of the regulars, Chu, who appeared in the most episodes
Oh,
of
yeah.
anybody that we or through these episodes.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's interesting to kind of like see more of his life through a perspective of someone who's known him for a long time and see him try to help someone in his life. It
Yeah.
was really it's what we say when we mean like it was really rewarding down the line when you feel like, okay, like I recognize Chu, now I know way more about Chu and who the people Chu keeps or have kept, or through his life, feel about him and whatnot. And so it's a very layered episode. um,
It is. And it's a heavier one. I think there are ones that are a bit lighter and ones that kind of sit with you a little bit longer and going on. Yeah, that's but I also think it's bringing to light a story that everyone knows. Everyone kind of knows someone who's been kind of unfairly made a caretaker, and,
yeah.
for people who maybe others around them would say, like, yeah, you really got to talk to this person about like figuring stuff out on their own. But when people are emotionally invested, they don't always do that right away. And they're just showing, yeah, in a big city they still have these very human problems. And going into that is the next episode we want to discuss from the second season, or
Hmm.
second in the Tokyo stories, fifth in the total of the show, is the Kitsune Udon. So this one I liked a lot. I think you can relate to this episode quite a bit. If you have friends in a similar field and you're put into situations where you're both either literally or at least somewhat from a distance competing with each other. And so for these two, it's very close. They're two aspiring voice actresses that stop by for quote unquote lucky bowls of Kitsune Udon. But after 6 months, only one of them seems to have any luck. But I think what's cool about this one is it's a good example of how the show shows both perspectives of each character really well. So they show both of these girls going to audition after audition. But then one of the girls runs into this guy who happens to be an author for a manga slash anime series that she really is invested in and like buys all the copies for and knows everything. And so when it is getting adapted to be an anime, she goes to the audition. But what her friend doesn't see, since, she kind of comes to this acceptance of it's okay if I make it or not, like I'll just figure this out. But since she's so into this series, when she goes to the audition, she's really passionate about it. But the other friend mostly sees her not showing up to other auditions. So, kind of in her perspective, hey, this person's like not trying as hard, not working as hard. And then they get booked and I don't. And she even says, like, I'm happy for you. And then kind of like backtracks and goes, hey, I'm actually not happy for you. I'm actually really jealous of you. Like, you totally deserve it. Don't get me wrong. But, we're both just working hard and there's only so many slots. But I think what this episode does show is like you will get the right opportunity that's meant for you. And when you're really genuinely invested in something, you're more likely to win. And for this other girl, she does like a great audition, but because she's not as tied to the actual piece, it kind of shows, and vice versa. The other girl who is way more into this piece is so much more in line with what they want because she's kind of gone into that world already. So that's what I really liked about this one is it gave validity to both sides of these characters, and still towards the end they're very openly communicating. I think that's another thing this show has is it shows a lot of people having a lot of discourse and really saying what they feel, which as much as you might get that in a fabricated way in reality television, I like this that it's very pulling at your heartstrings. It's people really kind of both setting boundaries when they need to, and then on the other side of it, also saying, know this is incorrect, but this is how I feel, and kind of giving some more value to your feelings and sorting that stuff out.
This one
So, yeah,
is tragic.
yeah,
It's just like you say, but it's so sad because it's like the first scene when they go in and they order the same dish to make the wish on, and they're telling the peanut gallery that they're complimenting each other's accomplishments at that point. They're not talking about themselves. The one girl will speak to the other girl, and then she'll fight back and be like, well, not fight back, but she'll shoot back and be like, yeah, but she's got this going on, and it's this like wonderful,
yeah,
it's gonna crash and burn.
yeah,
And it does, and in the one's like lowest moment, it's interesting when the artist shows up, and she is there to kind of like meet and show up to like him, and like get his approval in her lowest moment when she's unsure of her abilities, and he's unsure of her abilities. He calls her
yeah,
typical. He basically shrugs her off in a really disrespectful way. It's really interesting. It's one of those like meeting your heroes is a very complicated thing, especially
yeah,
after midnight at a small diner. But she's able to bust out his earliest work and show him like that she is actually really tied and really passionate and there, and she's got what it takes to go into the audition, and so yeah, it's interesting, and it is nice, and it's nice in that bedtime story way where it's her friend who's holding up the phone when they're watching like the finalized version of her work now that she's in this show.
yeah. It's showing that you can be each other's cheerleaders but still have moments of bitterness. But I think they're just more showing reality than anything else cuz I think, if you're both going for something like being a voice actress, which doesn't have a ton of parts, there's a lot of people who once you get cast in one, you're getting cast in others because they'll hear you on one and then go, oh, they'd be great for this. And so it is highly competitive. And yet they have this nice camaraderie between them, but that doesn't take away from the fact that they are going neck and neck and going to auditions together where they're bound to be one where one of them gets it and one of them doesn't.
Love that.
And
It's
and I that's it is just very much that is how it goes.
That's how it goes. You find
And
someone to like go through it with you who has that much in common with you, and then it comes to a point, and it's just
yeah.
it's a perfect
It's
story. It's unfortunate
yeah.
for anybody who goes through it, but it's a perfect story.
It is something so many people go through though. Like there's always going to be the time you get something that I don't want to say you don't deserve, but maybe you get it and you're burning someone else, and then there's going to be the time you get burned for
Mm-hmm.
something that you feel or you are merited in getting, but someone else just edges you out by a hair. And I think they like really capture that feeling really well for both the person who is the winner and the person who is ultimately the loser.
Yeah.
And yeah, going more into the entertainment industry on this one
Mm-hmm.
is the final episode that we will discuss for tonight is the 209 Sweet Rolled Omelet or Tamagoyaki. Mr. Lee shows up nightly, ordering rolled omelets every time. He turns out to be a film director fleeing from his own set and his father's legacy. So the context is this guy is from Hong Kong and he's a director in the Hong Kong cinema industry. His dad made all these like period kind of action films and he wants to kind of do his own thing, but he's also wanting to, I think, honor his father's memory by recreating one of his films. But he ends up running away to Japan when something in production goes wrong. And he's kind of just like, yeah, I'm just going to go to Tokyo, hang out for a bit. And it's funny because there's like these people that are looking for him and everyone thinks it's this like organized crime
This has my
group.
favorite line that the master says in all the episodes we watched. And like, have we described him that he's this kind of like stoic, strong,
Yeah.
kind of like old man with this scar under his eye,
Yes.
and he's got this apron on, and the director he's in one night, and as he's leaving, I love this so much. The master says to him as he's leaving, he goes, "Not that it's any of my business, but people have come in here looking for you." And it's just like, I don't know, it's so much character, so much
It's
character.
very like no judgment. I don't care what problems you have, but just FYI, there are there are people, one could say henchmen,
Yes.
looking for you. And really, it's his production crew that
Right.
is tracking him.
And they use the
Because they're just
same
like,
word apparently that organized crime uses.
yeah. It's an interesting footnote that they point out that the word that they use for, I think, gang or organized crime group in Japanese also just means like, I think what the word they're probably looking for is like crew. So they were probably saying like, oh, this crew is looking for you, which crew can have that context as well or that definition. And then here it's like, oh no, we meant like film crew.
Mhm.
And so it turns out being like everyone kind of like oohing and awing over like, oh, it's a film crew that's looking for you. Well, what are the films? And then the people are kind of like somewhat knowledgeable of his father. And but what's funny too is that the bar group very much is like, well, you don't want to make exactly what he made. We've seen those before. Do your own thing. That's what the people want to see. Like they like actually use some film terms too, which I thought was funny. Is like they're just kind of
Mhm.
like, yeah, we know exactly what we're talking about, by the way.
Gotta love the regulars.
And we're definitely weighing in here. Not that you asked. I also like that the master says, not that it's my business, while consistently wanting to be in everyone's business and commenting on it.
Right?
It's
Yeah, he's
it's his nice
always.
little button of being like, not that it's my business, even though I like to meddle everywhere I can.
Yeah. So what does he find out while visiting the diner though?
What he finds out when he visits the diner is kind of how to do film in his own way.
Hmm.
And he also finds a little bit more about his father from other patrons. If you want to go more into that, I feel like you could you could give some good justice to this part.
Okay, okay. I can try. Unfortunately, like, so I've only seen the episodes that we discussed. So
Oh,
I'm not super sure on Kozuzu's full story. Um, but so Kozuzu is basically like, from my understanding, she
yes.
was an actor on one of his father's productions, and like they had an affair. Was I watching
Yeah.
correctly? Okay.
Yes, you watched
While
this right.
while the director was a child. Um and so she was the one who would make his favorite dish, that he comes in specifically asking the master to
Yes.
make, which is the sweet rolled omelet.
Yes.
And she has since um like come over here to this area in Tokyo, and I'm reading that she owns a successful like restaurant gay bar. And
Yes.
she's trans, so she's a regular.
Yes.
And then he finds out for the first time coming here, it's coincidental that she happens to be at this bar as a regular patron, and that she
Yeah.
understands the sweet roll, and they kind of start doing scenes almost. And as they're doing scenes, she sees his father and him, and
Yes.
like runs out because she can't doesn't want to confront that in some way. He chases after her. He sees the actor that she once was in the production, and then they sort of like reconcile, uh, and and then yeah.
Yeah, he kind of learns a lot more about his father and kind of I think that same sort of it's like a really weird thing because it's not the same as the meeting your own heroes, but it's also like knowing a little bit more about someone maybe that you idolized and knowing that they weren't perfect and in a weird way I think it comforted him to be like I don't have to be perfect either because what he learns out from the other woman who owns the bar that's like, yeah, it's similar to the Midnight Diner, but it's definitely more like clubby type of
Okay.
vibe. And you see it in a previous episode, and it has like kind of because like the Midnight Diner is very stripped down.
Right.
It's like basics, and this one's more well decorated. It has like kind of brightly colored lights and more kind of a how do I put this? There's definitely more of like a just more glitzy feel to it. And the
Okay.
Midnight Diner is kind of like a home style diner. And so she comes over, and yeah, I think at first is kind of like shocked by how much he looks like his father and everything like that. And she kind of talks about being, the one that was picked to go on like trips with him and like be in all of his films. But as soon as like she wasn't fitting the roles that he was starting to produce, she kind of faded away. And I think
Oh.
that was part of why he was a little bit like, oh, like I don't have to put so much pressure on myself because it's, it's showing that other aspect that they kind of have as a consistent theme of like fame coming and going. So it's not as much of a if I make one bad movie, it's not going to stick with me forever. I should just go for it because I could easily be like her who like has this string of really good movies with my father and then like it could be that people don't really care about what I'm doing anymore. So I should kind of like seize the moment more and be more passionate about what I'm doing right now and less focused on am I, filling the shoes that were left for me. So, and yeah, and he also finds out like you're the one who taught how to make the tamagoyaki, which is funny because it's like a sweet rolled omelet. So there's actually like sugar in it, which I think is maybe not as traditional in like Western omelets, but as well as like fish broth. We'll go into the recipe after this. But he likes his extra sweet. So when he goes to the master in the beginning, he's like, "Hey, can you make this?" But he's like, "Oh, this is really good, but my mom always made it sweeter." And he kind of
Hmm.
calls. this woman, like his mom, because I think she hung around so much that he thought, oh, this must be my mom because his parents got divorced fairly young.
Oh.
And so the one thing that this woman tells him is like your father's two favorite things in life were movies and you. So,
Mm.
people like romantic people came and gone, like actors came and went, but the two things that were consistent in his life was you and all of his movies. And so I think that also was something that he took with him of being like, he kind of has that, reinforcement of like, okay, my dad like super cared about me, even though I kind of had like a maybe less traditional childhood. I was always at the focus. Like other people are kind of commenting on this. And, I also love these movies and I want to do him justice, but I'm not feeling that same pressure of like insecurity of doing it justice. It's more like a tribute. So, yeah, going into that, we can talk about. So, at the end, as we've mentioned, at the end of each of these episodes, you learn how to make one of the dishes. And so, I'm going to like describe to you the recipe of the sweet rolled omelet or tamagoyaki. That was the most recent episode we just discussed. So this is very much a comfort food. If you go to Tokyo and you go to Tsukiji, which is the sushi district known for people betting on like $20,000 tuna, they also have a bunch of food stands where you can get, sushi by the piece. It's really fresh fish. It's really awesome. And they also have, and, pre-COVID, obviously, super long lines for this dish, which is like a fresh rolled omelet, and you can get it, and it's so simple and so good and so comforting, which is a great little metaphor for how this show is as well. So what it does, it also is combining a bit of old and new, which I think we're seeing in this. We're seeing modern storytelling but with concepts that are as old as time. So with this, you're getting a omelet, but what you use is a sweet dashi. So a dashi is fish broth, and don't let me lose you there if you think that's off-putting. It's the same broth that you eat anytime you get not ramen, but other noodle soups. And a lot of times it's what you use to dip tempura in it. So it's something, if you've had a lot of basic Japanese food, you've had this before. So what you do is, I would say the quality of your eggs is quite important because in Japan, the egg yolks are almost orangey red. So you're wanting to get some of them fancy, free range, like the kind of eggs that they usually advertise on podcasts. You want to get those eggs. And you want to scramble them. I would recommend scrambling them with chopsticks. But what you do is you get a glass or a large, whatever you're using to mix, measuring pitcher or small bowl, and you crack your eggs in there, mix them on up. You add the sweet dashi, usually just like a tablespoon for one large egg, and then you mix it up together. You don't want to overmix it because then your egg will not be the right consistency. So you just want to get it so it's mixed just right. It's the same as not wanting to overmix your batter for cake. And then what you do is, traditionally they have like these square pans, and you kind of let one layer cook to just where you see the edges start to lighten up and get that kind of white, yellowish, kind of like a soft, like an Easter yellow to form. And then you roll it like a crepe to make another layer, and you do that about 10 times. And then you put it to rest in a sushi mat if you really want to do this right. I have definitely also done this where I make it like a traditional omelet and put it over rice, and the presentation is less photographic, but the taste is still good. But for this one, if you're doing it justice, you roll it in a sushi mat, which is like a small bamboo mat, and you kind of like start folding it together like you're holding a rolling pin. And then you unwrap it and you cut it into slices and you eat. It's one of those dishes that is not difficult to make, but it's very specific to make. So you really do have to follow the steps and be really methodical. Whew, we can talk with this. And I think that's something you see the master do in every episode. He starts off each episode cooking the pork miso soup, and you see him really taking his time with each step and not cutting corners and not taking shortcuts. I mean, I would say this show really is about taking the long way home and the people you meet along the way, because that's a big part of his whole establishment is like you are not rushing to get home. You're wanting to stay out and to kind of figure things out in the wee hours of the evening, kind of like, the night owl kind of not it's not like daydreaming because it's nighttime and you're not sleeping, but it's kind of that same thing of you're thinking a lot about what's going on in your life because you finally have some moments to think. And that's what a lot of this show lets you do. It's like you're at this bar and you're finally getting to kind of like decompress your day and take a little bit of a break and get to, even though you're thinking about these really big life moments, you're also able to sit back and laugh. You're getting to, get the peanut gallery's opinions and allow them to kind of take the edge off of something heavy. And when you learn more about those characters, you kind of see like, oh, they've gone through some stuff as well. And even the master, if it's not enough of a hook to watch these episodes from our really large promotion of this, you do have episodes in the 2014 version that actually go into how the master got his scar.
Oh, what?
Yeah.
Do we leave this at a cliffhanger? What?
Oh, yeah. We do leave this cliffhanger because we will totally revisit Midnight Diner Tokyo Stories again and have some fun with this format. But yeah, I think that's a wrap on it for tonight. More to come, just like there's more of these episodes to come, we hope, from this manga.
Yeah, that's it for this week's Primetime Party Time. Thank you for joining us. You can read the manga. I think the newest issue was like February 26th, 2021. But if you want more us as well, you can find us everywhere right here at ptptshow.com Monday nights at 9 p.m. The show couldn't have made without the following amazing people. We're talking our artwork was done by Fen. Find her at Fen Latte on Instagram. Our theme song was done by JWright. Find him at jwrightmusic.com. Our website was done by Coco. Thank you so much. And Tracy did our intro music tonight. Played guitar, played the theme song from Midnight Diner Tokyo Stories. That was great.
Yeah, that's fun.
Well, maybe we'll have to do some stuff like that again here on Primetime Party Time. For now, that's about it. I love in 209, the Sweet World Omelet episode, when the master treats them all to the dish because of like how much everyone's learned at the end of the episode, and everybody's like, he never does this.
Yeah.
That was great.
I do love that.